Hi, my name is Dr. Kelly Clarke, and today I'm going to talk about the importance of emotions. So I think before we talk about that, I want to talk about what are emotions. Theorists have debated long about what actually starts first. Is it the thoughts or is it the sensory experiences? So we talk about top-down processing of emotions or bottom-up. So top-down would be that we experience thoughts first. So in the example of, say, a bear coming through the trees, which I've had the experience a few times while mountain biking. And when that happens, when a bear comes out or something scares us, cognitive theorists would say that the thought of seeing the bear first triggers an anatomic reaction. And so that we have the thought, okay, that's a bear. Our body starts to get alerted to that. We have the resulting fear. We have an action tendency. We run away. Other people would say that emotion is more driven by sensory experience or bottom up. So it's something that we experience more by you would see the bear, or rather hear it first, maybe hear the sensory experience of hearing that something's wrestling in the woods. Then visually you see this thing, and then you start to have the emotion of fear, and it propels your body into running. Later, you would interpret that, oh, that was a bear. And I realized that this happens so quickly, like we don't actually have all those steps happening as slowly as I just said. They happen very quickly. But emotion is said to be either driven by thoughts that have this cascading effect on our body, alerting action tendencies such as running, or other theorists have said that no, it's more of a sensory thing. When we have an emotion, it starts from senses and then works up to our thought and the ability to interpret those signals as something, say, like fear. And as a result, you'd say that was a bear. So interesting. I think that debate has been long in the literature and in philosophy. You know, back in the Middle Ages in Western philosophy, there was a debate between rationalism and empiricism. And one of the people, probably you've heard of this before, René Descartes, who is a scientist, philosopher, mathematician, argued back while the debate was going on between empiricism and rationalism, he argued, saying that through the use of scientific inquiry that he used as doubt. So for Descartes, things were only provable through doubt. So he would doubt something until it could be falsifiable or provable, and came up with that famous Latin saying, cogito ergo sum. And I think, therefore I am. So you may have heard of that before. It's definitely something we've heard in our culture. But Descartes came up with that. He came up with the idea that I think, therefore I am. And it was in the context of he was trying to explain existence. So how does he know that he actually exists? Interesting stuff. If you like philosophy, how do we actually prove that we exist? Descartes argued that we could be in a dreamlike world, like The Matrix. The Matrix was a great show. I really enjoyed that. I didn't realize till whatever it was, 15, 20 minutes into it, that it was not reality, that they were jumping off the walls. This was a dreamlike state, that their senses had been fooled, lied to, and it was not real. And so this is kind of what Descartes is getting to, is that his existence, his proof that he was real could not be substantiated through sensory experience. He could doubt that. It could be living in a dream world. So he could argue that his thoughts about even that this could be false, that he's living in a dream world, he still had the thoughts. He still had the doubts about his existence. The thoughts themselves were still there. So his argument was that if I have thoughts and they are clearly still there, it's proof of my existence. Thoughts are there. I'm doubting my thoughts. The fact that I can doubt them says that there is thought, and that proves that I am. I think, therefore I am. His thoughts were proof not only of existence, but they were proof of a best way or the most evident way to knowing the world around us, something called epistemology. So epistemology is the idea that how do we come to know the things around us? So the argument became between rationalism, which Descartes was. He was a cognitivist. That thinking, the use of logic, that's what rationalists tried to prove the existence, and they thought it was the best way to interpret, or the most evident way to interpret reality around us and the world around us. Whereas empiricists would say that no, the best way the most evident way to experience the world around us was through sensory experiences, not just through logic and thought. So I'm getting to all of this because this has definitely been disposed in our society. Western thought is clear in our thinking nowadays, even in our society. And going back to some of the conversation that I had previously in a previous video, is that we can see in society that there is this secondary appreciation of emotion over thought. We'll have thoughts of things like this. We'll say in society that, oh, I was thinking with my heart, not my head. I was, overly emotional. Things like these. These are things that we would think clouded or biased our thinking. So it's definitely in our society that we have had moments where, thinking with our heart instead of our head, where there's this preference for thinking clearly and more beneficially is through logic, reason, not emotion. So today I wanted to talk about the benefit of emotion. It's clear that there are definitely times when we have been overly emotional and it resulted in some biased thinking. It's clear that sometimes when we've been overly emotional, it resulted in a bad decision or an argument going awry. But I wanted to speak today a little bit more about the benefits of emotion over cognition. So definitely we see that in society, there is this belief that emotion is secondary to thought. And I think it's also influenced some of the views on what makes emotion. Is it an idea first? Is it a cognition first? And emotion secondary? Or is it sensory? Emotions start with the senses and they work up to the head, and we later decide what the emotion was by interpreting it through sensory experience. So I wanted to talk about Robert Zajonc. So Robert Zajonc was an individual who wrote an article back in 1980 called The Primacy of Emotion. He argued that emotion could be experienced without any thought. So as I was saying earlier, cognitive theorists would say that you can't have an emotion without a thought. And of course, there's a lot of reason to believe that thought does lead to emotion, especially as we get older. Whereas when you think about babies, a baby experiences the world through sensory experiences. They don't have a lot of files. They don't have a lot of thoughts. They experience by sucking on things, touching things, tactile. It's very sensory. But as we get older, clearly emotion is related to files, to thoughts that we have. A bully treated me this way. And so I have a feeling of anger that is definitely connected to the feeling of being offended or taking my power away. So it's clear that there is cognition in emotion, but I wanted to talk today about Robert Zajonc's argument that emotion can occur without cognition at all. Again, back to the importance of emotion. He argued that during experiments with animals, they can induce nausea in animals by either having them sleep or just even after they eat something, put a nausea-inducing substance in their food, and later that association that having been eaten, they didn't like the food anymore. So rather than them going, oh, this is a bad tasting food intellectually, they experienced that sensory. And also even in unconscious patients or in animals, you give a nausea-induced substance to them that without even thinking about it, because they're unconscious, they will experience that nausea, that disgust, that emotion without any cognition. So he argued first that in those kind of experiments, you don't need thinking before emotion starts. He also argued that through experiences, of perceptions of danger, that the visual processing centers of our brain actually bypass thinking and go right to the thalamus and to the amygdala in perceptions of threats. So like I talked about the bear example, that there's arguments that the visual processing system goes right to the emotions that bypass thinking so that you can get out of there quicker and save your life. So there's that argument as well. And the last one that he's arguing is that through chemicals, through other ways of stimulating the emotional systems, electrical stimulation through drugs, hormones, can be produced emotional responses without cognition, without thinking again. So there was some experiments done where they took biofeedback mechanisms or a facial feedback mechanism where they would take a pen, put it in your teeth and get them to clench on it like this, inducing a pseudo smile. And without cognition, they noticed that people, when they did that, had more positive emotional experiences just by putting the pen in their mouth. The facial expression of a smile was on their face, and they would experience more positive or happy emotion. They also noticed by putting that in the pucker, like smoking a cigarette, where it would be more of a grimace, produce more negative emotions. So again, without having to have a cognition or a thought, emotions produced. So I say all of this just to really get to that emotion is so important, bypasses thinking, cognition, and is useful in our survival, everyday experiences. In fact, Antonio Damasio, is a neurologist, said that we cannot make a decision or a choice. None of us can actually make a choice, a decision, without emotion. It's not just a lining up of pros and cons, making a list. That emotion is fundamental to making choices and decisions. Very interesting. Another interesting thing in the emotion research is the effect of mood processing, moods and processing information. In other words, maybe you've heard about this, but being in a positive mood, we call this valence, where there's positive or negative moods. Positive would be more happy, joy, those things. Negative mood would be more sadness, disgust, and those kind of more negative emotions, the more uncomfortable emotions. But when we're in a positive mood, positive valence, negative mood or negative valence, positive moods are associated with processing information in a lighter, more superficial, more buoyant way, less thoroughgoing, but also can be more creative in processing information, more spontaneous, and more open to data than in a negative mood. However, the data suggests that when you're in a negative mood, you process information more thoroughly, more, and sometimes more accurately. So in other words, when you're in a sad mood, you would be more accurate, thoroughgoing, more with detail, more tedious to go through the information, or more specifically looking at the data, as opposed to that more positive mood. So it's interesting in that, so it makes sense that when you're going to Mexico and they pull you out and have you sign up for a timeshare after giving you a pina colada and having great music on and serving you breakfast, they want you to be in a buoyant, more optimistic, positive mood, because you tend to be more open to experience, more open to what's going on presented before you. But you might be more quick to make a judgment and less thoroughgoing, say, than if you were in a sad mood. So if the same person was in a sad mood, here's the timeshare, they would be more fastidious, detail-oriented, driven by the data, looking at the numbers, and more thoroughgoing. So interesting that emotions, they help us to process information in a different way. So if you had the same person exposed to the timeshare in a positive mood versus a negative mood, it could produce a different judgment. It could produce a different way of assimilating the information. In the more optimistic mood, you might go, hey, this is a great deal. In the more negative mood, you might go, well, the numbers don't crunch, and I'm not going to do it. So more data-driven experience. Interesting that this is something that happens to all of us. All of us are wired this way. That is an effect that's been proven in the research. What's also proven in the research is the effect of emotion on memory. Most of us, again, can relate to strong emotions facilitating the encoding of memories. So when we're in a really great mood, had a really great experience, a really great holiday with our family, you remember those details. Whereas if I went to the ATM and was getting out $10, I don't remember those memories. They're not emotionally charged. Whereas if you have a really negative experience, a really sad experience, you remember details of that experience more vividly than just benign emotional experiences. You don't remember those details. So nature has set us up that emotion facilitates the encoding of memory, much more detailed when we have strong emotion, either positive, back to valence, positive or negative emotion. The other thing that happens is also the alerting of attention. Emotion alerts us to pay attention to details in the environment, what we're working on, relationships that we have, much more thoroughly than if you're just in a bland mood. So again, when you're alerted by positive experiences, again, the idea is that in positive valence, there's no threat. You're feeling light. You're not worried about being eaten by a bear, for example. And so you're more open and optimistic of the data and more willing to accept things without a fear of something going poorly. Whereas you could see from a history that if we were afraid of an environment like a bear attacking us, we'd be more data driven, more thorough, more in search of details that could possibly harm us. So in that sense, we remember details when we're in a sad mood, again, helping us to survive. This is something that's age old, it's past, it's wired into us. But it is an effect, even though there's no bear or even though there's no threat of us being hurt in an environment, we still have these activated. So somebody who's very depressed, say for example, is going to interpret the world, process information in a more thoroughgoing, more detailed way, where somebody's more optimistic, maybe more open to experience, more open to data, more creative than somebody who's in a negative or a downcast mood. Very interesting. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention were mood congruent effects. Another effect of emotion, or rather mood, is on creating a effect of recalling memories that are consistent with valence, so positive or negative valence. So what is a mood as opposed to an emotion? Moods are something that are longer in duration, have less cognitive information in it. So in other words, when you're grumpy or mad at somebody that's bothered you, there's usually, or several other things that are going on in your life. A mood can have less specific details, but you're just in this general mood state. Say, for example, that it was in a sad or an angry mood state. So the angry or sad mood state would be on the negative valence side as opposed to the positive valence side. Research has showed that we actually pull up details that are congruent with our mood. They're called mood congruent effects on memory. So when you're in a positive mood, you will pull up positive memories consistent with the positive valence that you're in. So in other words, when you're out with a family or with your wife or romantic partner, and you're going on a holiday, you might remember, oh, I remember back when we were here before and I jumped off the springboard, and you'll pull up all of these positive memories that are congruent with your present mood. If you're happy, if you're joyful, some of those memories might come back to you because there's an effect of the mood to pull up memories that are consistent with it. It goes the other way as well. So for example, if you are fighting with your romantic partner, or say you had some issue with a friend and you're angry, you're feeling that you were offended in some way, you're likely to pull up mood congruent memories with that current emotional state. So you might go, oh, this person always does this, is always late, is always never showing up on time. And then you start to recount, I remember back on September 7th and then October 14th, and you'll start pulling out these details because the emotional system alerts the brain, it pulls out memories that are consistent with that mood state. So it's interesting, and that effect is something that is important for us to be aware of, because, for example, if you have a fight with a friend or someone that you're close to, and you're pulling up all these details, that you're in a state that cannot go the other way to pull up positive details. So it may be that they're not always late, but now you're pulling out details that they are because you're in that mood state. What would be important then is to try to calm down, get to a more neutral mood state, and then try to remember, yes, times that they have shown that they can be on time. So it's important to notice the effects of emotion on how we process information, and also on how we retrieve memories, because really you're going to gain data that's consistent with your current mood. Another effect that I wanted to talk about with emotion that I think is beneficial is in just awareness of the emotions when I do therapy with people. And this could be something in everyday life, for example, that you might benefit from being aware with your own emotions. So for example, a clear example where cognitive content goes out the window oftentimes for people is during panic attacks. There's such a heightened emotional response that they can't retrieve the memories happening that led up to the panic attack. So I'll often say, tell me about your panic attack. Was there anything that happened before it? Because there always is. And they'll have, I have no memory of it. I can't remember it. In fact, they'll feel powerless because they can't identify anything that's consistent with their panic attacks. And the reality is that that's not quite accurate. And they're having a difficulty retrieving that information. So I'll always start with the emotion. And I'll start with the physiological responses we call feelings. So what are feelings? Feelings are body sensations or representations of emotions. So, for example, when you first saw your romantic partner walking across the hallway, you didn't intellectually just go, well, they're very tall and they're dressed very nicely, and they're somebody I'd really like to get to meet because they seem like they've got those two things going for them. You likely had a physiological response. You looked at them and went, they're also attractive, they're dressed nicely, and there was a physical response. Imagine feeling attraction without having a body. So those thoughts are translated into emotions, visual attraction, that are registered in our body in something we call feelings. So feelings are physical representations of emotions. So your heart starts beating when you see that person you're attracted to. You might have a sweaty hand as you go to shake their hand. And so very important when I'm doing therapy is I start with the feeling. So during that panic attack, what did you feel? Wow, my throat was tight. And I felt a lot of tension in my head. I felt like I had a headache, and then I started to get dizzy. All these are somatic or body symptoms, sensory driven, and they're feelings. And so I'm able to go, okay, can you connect the emotion with that dizzy feeling, that also the throat tightening up, or you're getting a headache? And they'll often be able to say, yeah, I felt scared. I was fearful. I was sad. And then I'll go, okay, well, and then I'll start to go back to what thoughts, what events, what experience just happened before those things to set those off. And so very important, emotion is very useful in navigating our experiences in the day. You meet a new person that you've never met before, and relationship studies have actually shown this, that we don't tend to just think about all the attributes that we like in somebody that we meet. Oh yeah, they seem to be professional. They seem to be well dressed. They seem to know their information. We ask, so you almost have this cognition list of attributes that when you meet somebody new, relationship research shows that when we find somebody that we're attracted to, yes, you build that list up. They seem to be nice dressed, et cetera, et cetera. But we ask an implicit question: how do I feel? How do I feel about them? So have you had that experience before where you met somebody and you're just like, I just don't really like them. I can't put my finger on it. I just don't really like them. And so people implicitly, an unspoken question they ask them, how do I feel about it? Is something that happens. So emotion is great information. And it also goes back to the attraction. So we've all had that, when we were younger, or, perhaps you are young and looking at a potential person you would like to romantically be in relationship with. The relationship research showed that just coming up with that list of all those positive qualities outweighing the negative qualities, they found that that's not an indication of, yeah, I'm going to pursue this person. Again, that implicit question comes out of, how do I feel about them? So we've all heard that before. Yeah, they're good on paper. But when we actually comes to everyday functioning, we use our emotions as a heuristic, as a rule of thumb for making decisions, guiding behavior. And also, what I'm saying right now, we should use that as evidence about fears, anxieties, pains, and thoughts we had related to that. I gave the example of panic attack. So I often use them in therapy, but I'll encourage you to think about, as you're going through your life, how did I feel about it? What was the emotion? And what were the thoughts preceding some of these experiences? Emotions are a great guide to let us know how we're experiencing life, how we're navigating the world, and how we're feeling in our own experience, in our own life. So I hope that was helpful. I'm Dr. Kelly Clarke. If you have any more questions or want to contact me, go to drkellyclarke.com.